Hey, everybody. I'm Largo. This is The Lair. And today on Beasties and Baddies, we're going to talk about one of my favorites, the Universal Classic Monsters. And to help me to explore this unique set of toys and cinematography is my friend and yours, the great Gojitron. Hey, Goji.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thanks for agreeing to help me kind of check out these classic monsters.
hmm
I know they're a favorite of yours.
Absolutely.
Uh, did you grow up watching these like on Saturday reruns, or did you catch stuff when they would play them in the matinees? You
I
know?
did. My first exposure to monster movies in general was in elementary school. Every once in a while, they'd gather up the student body, take us to the auditorium, and show us a film on the old, 16 millimeter projector, whatever it was. And I guess they do this during teacher meeting days to keep us occupied. I mean, these days they just kind of send the kids home early, make it the parents' problem. But back in those
Right.
days, they actually took responsibility for the kids. So it was a weird slate of movies. I don't know where they got them or how they chose them, but one of the ones I saw was The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and that was my first monster movie, and I was fascinated with it. And I knew from watching cartoons after school, there was a show on Saturdays called Creature Double Feature, shown on UHF station called WLVI Channel 56 outside of Boston, Mass. So I
Cool.
said, hey, this might be something I want to check out. So I started watching after cartoons. You take an hour break, then from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock, Creature Double Feature. And that's how I discovered the Universal Monsters, the Hammer Monsters, and some other guys that may be looking over my shoulder here. So, yeah, that's what got me into monster movies. Just
Cool.
a fluke from elementary school.
Yeah, the only cool thing we ever got shown in elementary school is on Halloween they showed the Star Trek episode that where they were kind of in a haunted house. I think it was called
hmm
Cat's Paw or something. That was kind of
Yes.
neat.
Yeah.
That was as close as we got to cool. My school was kind of lame. But for me, it was Saturdays after, yeah, like after cartoons and cereal and everything and
hmm
wrestling or whatever else is on. There'd be afternoon shows, and sometimes it'd be classic movie monsters. Sometimes it would be the Godzilla creature of the week kind of stuff. So I always remember them kind of being in the background and part of pop culture and
Right.
enjoying what I'd seen of them. I don't know when the transition happened where we went from this is kind of scary and cool to these are kind of campy by today's standards. Did you ever reach that transition at a certain place or?
Yeah, I mean, I think when modern horror movies started coming in and showed you like the body horror and all that kind of stuff, that's when you kind of looked at it and said, yeah, these are kind of old fashioned. But you know what? I like old fashioned. I don't like modern horror. I like the classics. I like when it was more suspenseful and when the horror came from what you thought was there rather than, gore shown on the screen, things like that.
Yeah,
So yeah,
the
I'm a
less is
classic horror
more.
fan. Hmm
That's one of the things I loved about the Hitchcock style is if something was going to happen, he would either fade to black or he'd move the camera off screen or to something benign. And you know something violent's happening over here, but you're not going to see it. It leaves it up to your imagination, which is usually more terrifying.
Right. Exactly.
So, yeah, a lot of these are obviously classics. Again, special guest Gojitron. Thank you,
That's
sir, for
me.
showing up.
Hmm
And to start, we're just going to talk about what is a classic monster. According to Universal Studios, from around 1923 through the 60s, Universal Studios created the now classic movie monsters. Universal Monsters features all the heavyweights of the era, from Dracula and Frankenstein to the Mummy and Wolfman, and many more. So I kind of broke down the list. I mean, it's a uh, rabbit hole. I use that a lot, but it is.
Yes.
It's a definite rabbit hole going
hmm
down this classic horror genre. There's so many good contenders, but how many are the top?
Right.
Um,
I think
to me, these
when it comes to Universal Monsters, when they do their marketing, what you have on the screen here, that would be considered the big five,
yeah, they're the ones that are the most
recognizable.
recognizable. Yeah, definitely the most in our pop culture. So everybody knows Drac and Frank and the Wolf Man, not just a werewolf. He's the Wolf Man.
Right.
You know, the Mummy and the creature from the Black Lagoon, also known as Gill Man. Now, was that an
Mhm.
official name for him, or was that just kind of a behind the scenes name?
I can't recall if they actually called him Gilman in the film or not. I'm not sure if that was a fan name or where that came from.
Yeah,
But I think most people just call him the creature for short.
right. And then there's the Also Rans.
Hmm.
These are also classics. They're well known by many, but they're not quite as popular as the first set. So, The Bride, The Invisible Man, Phantom of the Opera, and The Hunchback of
Hmm.
Notre Dame.
Yeah.
And then there were a couple that surprised me. I had always assumed these were Universal classic monsters, but they are not. Uh, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a classic, obviously, but it was not done by Universal. It was done by another picture company. And
Hmm.
The Fly, also same kind of thing.
Right.
So even though we're going to kind of talk about them as classics, they don't really fit with the Universal stuff.
Right.
But they're in the same ballpark.
Yep.
So let's talk merchandising. You got some
Hmm.
merchandising. Um, According to Wikipedia, after the Universal horror films were syndicated to television, this led to a rise in the popularity of merchandise based on Frankenstein's monster and Dracula. And throughout the 1960s and into the 70s, the Universal monsters were promoted via merchandising, which included Halloween costumes, Aurora model kits, paperback novelizations, makeup, how to manuals, t shirt iron ons, posters, trading cards, and more. And growing up, I definitely remember the Halloween costumes. Those like the Ben Coopers with the
Yep.
mask and the vinyl suit.
The mask that
Those,
you couldn't see through or breathe in.
yes, those were miserable to wear. They usually ended up on the forehead so you could breathe and see what you
Right.
were doing. The Aurora model kits were fun. That might be another thing to look into one of these days. Is some of those monster model kits because they're
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah.
You can still, I think they're still reproducing some of those.
Yeah, they come
And
up every few years. You can get reproductions.
And for some reason, monster stuff and glow in the dark just go like peanut butter and jelly. A lot
Hmm.
of those monster kits I remember having glow in the dark parts.
Yep.
Some of the bendy figures were glow in the dark. We'll talk
Hmm.
about a few of those as we move forward.
Right.
Um, and merchandising of the characters in formats such as clothing and board games has continued into the 21st century. And part of that
Absolutely.
is action figures, which is kind of a more recent thing. There have always been some dolls or figurines, but articulated figures is kind of a more recent thing that we've seen that's become popular.
Hmm.
So I think it's fair to say that this is the man we should start with when it comes to classic horror.
Right.
Lon Chaney Sr., just known as Lon Chaney until his son got into the act,
Hmm.
well known as the man of a thousand faces because of his innate ability. He started as a makeup artist and a vaudevillian actor, of all things.
Hmm.
He just had this phenomenal ability to use makeup and applications to transform his face into something really horrifying,
Yep.
whether it be a hunchback, a phantom, a vampire, whatever the script called for.
Hmm.
He would actually create an effect.
Right.
And
Yeah, he had
well
that
before,
amazing ability to transform himself into the character. No makeup artist needed. He did it himself, which is something
right.
you'd never see a modern actor do. They need all their hair and makeup people. This guy did it all on his own. He created his own, effects and everything. It was great.
Yeah. One little Easter egg I thought was interesting is he had a makeup kit. It was kind of like a leather doctor's bag that he would carry around, and it actually ended up in the movies. Occasionally, it would be in the background on a table or here and there, and it was just kind of a nod saying, "Yeah, I did that." So
Yep.
I wanted to make sure everybody had a picture of his handsome mug without the effects. So when you
Right.
see him in his transformation, you see just how impressive it is.
Hmm.
So his first big claim to fame was the Hunchback. Now, this, I guess, would be what you would call the original classic monster. It wasn't really considered as such at the time. This was a silent film,
Yes.
and most of the early um, success with horror came from the silent era. Nosferatu, which was again another picture company, really scared the dickens out of people. And The Hunchback was while it was classic literature, there was a lot of body horror,
Hmm.
and it definitely shook audiences, especially as you can see from his applications. It's pretty dramatic.
Hmm. And these classic literature pieces were very popular to make into films in the early days because I've read that this version of The Hunchback is actually the seventh film adaptation, and that was back in 1923. So there were a lot of people in the silent era making these type of films. Just a few of them are now known to us because of preservation. And actually, there's 15 minutes of this film that have been lost over the years. So you can get this film on DVD in modern times, but it's not the entire film. It has been partially lost over the years.
So the original film just degraded to a point where nobody recopied it.
Yeah, I mean, the old days, they didn't preserve things as well as we do now.
Right. That's a shame because it's well done. And of
Mhm.
course, with the silent film, everything is pantomime. Everything has to be overacted. So, I mean, in some ways, it's more demanding on the actors
Mhm.
than a talkie, as they called them.
Right.
But uh, there have been a few toys,
Hmm.
but not a lot of love for the Hunchback until Disney got a hold of it and did their thing. But
Yeah.
I'm not going to go there because
Hmm.
Disney's a whole different genre.
Do have this one as well.
Yeah,
That's the reaction figure. This is just a recent purchase I picked up. I'm trying to complete all the classic monsters in the reaction line. So that's a recent purchase, and the card art on these is absolutely gorgeous. You know,
let me pop you up here so we can
I
take a look
know
at that.
people say that reaction is overpriced, and yeah, that's true. But if you're a mint on card collector, you're not going to find nicer card art than the reaction line.
Right, and that really seems to be the selling point with that line is the card art because it's more of a piece you hang on your wall and appreciate the card art as much as the figure, in
Hmm.
my opinion.
Yep.
Yeah, those are pretty cool,
Hmm.
and they're doing a lot of the different horror figures now.
Yeah, they're doing well. They did the entire Universal line, including some of the variants like Frankenstein and Son of Frankenstein, different versions of the Phantom, like when he's in the Mask of the Red Death costume, things like that.
Right,
So yeah, there's a
that's neat.
few to choose from.
With with the larger figures that are there wasn't a lot for the Hunchback, but I did pick this one from a few years ago from Diamond Select because it's not terrible.
Right.
It's well executed as far as the sculpt. It looks like the character from the original film,
Hmm.
and he comes with some cool accessories. There being a gargoyle and his crown from a few scenes in the film.
Right.
So
The
I thought,
King of Fools, I believe, was that.
yes.
Yeah.
And for more recent
Hmm.
days, this I believe is still available. This
Right.
is Migo's edition of
Yep.
the Hunchback.
I did do a video featuring that guy. So this version is actually based on the 1939 film starring Charles Lawton. It
Okay,
was it was released as a Universal monster. It was actually originally an RKO picture, but I think the rights may have transferred over the years, and now Universal has the rights to this film. That's why it's classified as a Universal monster now. A lot of
okay,
those old films from studios that don't exist anymore have changed hands over the years, so it's hard to keep track of exactly who owns what these days. But
right.
yeah,
That
originally an
makes
RKO picture, now a Universal release.
that makes more sense. Why the costume and the face design is
Hmm.
different from
Yep.
the classic. Now this one was a variant that Migo did, and I think
Right.
it's probably closer to that original Lon Chaney version.
Yeah, I think this is meant
Although,
to be just a generic Hunchback. So,
okay,
like I said, those old literary characters are in public domain now, so you can do any version of a Hunchback you want, like Disney did. It just
hmm,
can't look like someone's trademarked version of the Hunchback.
okay, that makes sense.
Hmm.
So after his success with The Hunchback, Chaney went on to do a great rendition of The Phantom of the Opera. This was in 1925.
Hmm.
And like you said, I believe there had been other versions prior in silent
Yes.
film, and there were
Hmm.
definitely many that came after. But
Hmm.
this image, for some reason, really stuck with audiences.
Right.
And when you think classic movie monster, it's Lon Chaney's makeup that most
Yep.
people think of.
And they kept this makeup hidden until the film was released. So the first time anybody saw it was that famous scene where Christine pulls off the mask, and you see this underneath. One of the most famous scenes from early Hollywood.
Yeah, and that scream was real. She was terrified seeing it, as were many of the people in the audience, I'm sure.
Hmm.
So again, just and a lot of it, the makeup had to tell the story because it was a silent film.
Right.
So when you see people react, their reactions have to be kind of magnified to make up for it being a silent film. But when you see the actress, pull the cloth and see the face, it's
Mm.
she absolutely looks terrified.
Yeah.
So,
Hmm.
and of course, Migo did some great versions of this,
Hmm.
uh, including the Red Death costume as well
Yep.
as his classic look there.
Hmm.
And so you're saying Reaction is also doing these similar styles?
They've done them. Yeah, they several years ago they did them. They kind of
Okay,
yeah they kind of cycle through all the Universal monsters in reaction, so they're still available.
okay.
But yeah, they came out a
I,
couple years ago.
right, and I believe these are also still available, perhaps Amazon and a few other places.
Yeah,
So
I'm
if you're
sure you can
interested
for it.
in, yeah, and they're not terribly priced. I like the Migos. One, I like Migo from back in the day, but I was more into the superheroes at that time, growing up.
Hmm.
I really like what they're doing with the horror stuff.
Yep.
The cloth suits are well done. The face sculpts are pretty good. They have
Hmm.
definitely improved over the years. So if
Yep.
you're curious about making a collection, this is not a bad way to go.
Yeah, Migos a very niche style of figure, but the modern Migos have been kept at a reasonable price, so it's not that hard to jump into the line if you want to.
Yeah. Again, a notable version of the Phantom from Diamond Select Toys. I really like this one because of all the accessories.
Right.
You get the organ, and you get a lot of other pieces that make a scene,
Hmm.
and it's really neat.
Yep.
So the articulation wasn't great on these, but the sculpt was beautiful.
Hmm.
And for those who are NECA fans, NECA has been doing Universal Monsters for a while now. This one has been teased. They did a thing at, I think it was Comic Con, San Diego Comic Con, or one of the events last year where they showed these. This one is not in stores yet, but should be released by September of this year. That's when it's slated to arrive. I think it can be pre ordered in certain places. And again, beautiful sculpt, lots of accessories, a lot of different facial features.
Yep.
The just a classic. So
I
I'm
have
looking
not
forward to
jumped into
this.
the NECA Universal monsters yet. I'm trying not to, just because I'm out of space and I'm
Yes.
trying to conserve money for other things. But they do look really nice.
Yeah, and I was kind of torn. I looked at NECA, and then I looked at what Jax has been doing, and or is it Jax or is it no
Jada,
Jada?
Jada.
Excuse me, Jada. I went with the Jadas because they're actual 1/12 6-inch scale, which is what most of my collection is, whereas NECA is more 7-inch one
Right.
tenth scale.
Mhm.
But the detail on these is so good. I
Yeah.
am tempted to delve into these.
Yeah.
So we'll.
And they're also doing those accessory kits as well. Like you can get the whole sarcophagus set up for the mummy and things like that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
it's a good
I
find.
think we'll take a look at those in a minute.
Hmm.
Now, I did mention this one, even though it's not the classic version, it is one that a lot of people might have been their first Phantom, and this was Claude Rains in the role.
Hmm.
Um, Most people remember this one because it was, obviously a more modern take, and it came out with a lot of the more classic monsters as they were really becoming popular. It also was filmed in Technicolor, which was a new process at the time. So a lot of the scenes were just really vibrant. And of course, this being a Paris opera house, it was opulent to begin with. And so when you put it in color, it's like, wow. And it caused it to win an Oscar for art direction cinematography.
Yep. And I believe they used some of the same sets from the old Lon Chaney film in this one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That I did not know.
Mm.
Makes sense, though.
Yeah.
So now we get into the ones that most people are more familiar with. So Dracula came out in 1931
Hmm.
and starred Bela Lugosi, which most people know that name if you don't know his face outside of the makeup. Interesting character in and of himself. Good actor.
Hmm.
Kind of a tragic life story, but this was the role that most people remember him for, and he
Right.
did a really good job.
Yeah. And this film was actually based on a stage play that had run for several years, and Lugosi starred in the stage play. So he went from theater to film with this character. He transitioned from theater to film with this. Unfortunately, because of this role, he was typecast and he couldn't get much work outside the horror genre between being typecast and because of his thick Hungarian accent. He couldn't get a lot of other roles. And I think that
Mm,
caused a little bit of resentment in his career because, he was typecast by the role. But it's what
yeah,
most people know him for. And he did become the iconic image of what Dracula is going on 90 years now. When people think of Dracula, they think of this.
that's true.
Mm.
Many imitators, but he was the one that really um, pioneered a lot of the suave and deadly vampire idea for
Mhm.
Dracula. And of course, NECA has done a great rendition of the Bela Lugosi style vampire. Now, this one is their Transylvania edition, which means when he was still back in his home country. So he's wearing the medal, he's got the nice suit, cloth cape, different head expressions, the giant bat, the wine, the candle, lots of stuff from the movie to do a great scene with.
Mhm.
It's impressive. This is the one I have, and I really like it. It's a
Mhm.
more generic version. It's not Bela Lugosi's likeness,
Right.
but again, it captures that same essence. It's a little less expensive, and it's in my scale.
Mhm.
So I'm happy with it. However, I did find out Jada is doing a Bela Lugosi edition. This will be a
Nice.
special one. I believe it's going to be coming out first quarter, so it should be any time now.
Mhm.
And comes with a couple of different expressions of Lugosi's vampire. Also comes with some playbills, which I believe are of his time as doing this in the theater as well
Mhm.
as the film.
Yep.
So that's very interesting.
Mhm. Yeah, that's the
So
thing with some of these monsters. You can uh, you can license the universal versions of the monsters, but in some cases you have to license the actor likeness separately from their estate. So that's why you see some universal Draculas that look like Lugosi and some don't. It's depending on who has negotiated what license to do what.
okay,
So I would
that makes
assume
sense.
a low end, like a $20 figure, like the original Jada. That's why it doesn't look like Lugosi. I assume this is going to cost a little bit more because it does have the likeness.
I think it's in the $30 price range. It's
Yeah.
not too much more, but it
Mhm.
is a special edition.
Yep.
So that explains why the
Hmm.
likeness rights would make sense.
Right.
And of course, there's our Migo classics.
Hmm.
Two variants: gray cape, red cape. Facial structure, I think, is pretty much the same. It's just the cape that I think is the big difference there.
Hmm.
Um, Now, this one actually is branded as a Lugosi uh, Dracula.
Yep.
So, do you think the head sculpt is pretty close
I
for
mean,
Migo?
yeah, a little bit. A little bit. It's not exact. This is one of the first figures that Mego came out with when they returned about 5 6 years ago when they came back. This was one of the first figures they put out, so they've refined their process since this figure. I think.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they'll revisit it.
Hmm.
And then, of course, you can't have a Universal monster without having sequels. They love sequels.
Hmm.
So I just wanted to touch on a few of the more interesting ones. Each one of the Universal monsters kind of has their own legacy series that follows behind.
Right.
Because, hey, they're trying to get on that bandwagon and get some of that cinema cash.
Hmm.
Dracula's Daughter was the second installment in the Dracula Universal series, and it was kind of an odd one. It was very loosely, supposedly based on a Bram Stoker story, but a lot of people say it has a much closer resemblance to a story called Carmilla, which was a Gothic novella, and that I've actually heard as an audio drama. and it's a good story. So again, it follows that same idea of, you know, Dracula has died in the first film. The daughter is trying to cure the vampirism that she inherited from her father, and of course, tragedies ensue. Um, Worth a watch if you're looking for something, but not very many people know about this one anymore. I don't think wasn't
Right.
the most popular.
Yeah, a lot of the
And
sequels have
then,
kind of flown under the radar.
yeah, this one I thought was interesting because of who plays the son of Dracula, Count Alucard, as he was
Hmm.
called, is Lon Chaney Jr.,
Hmm.
the son of our famous actor from before.
Hmm.
He got into the horror genre, following in his father's footsteps, and he does go on to play a much more famous monster later.
Yes.
But not a terrible film, but not as great as what came before. But worth noting.
Hmm.
And then we get into one of the other all-time favorites, the classic Frankenstein.
Hmm.
And this is where people originally started confusing the name Frankenstein with the creature or monster. But
Right.
Frankenstein's monster was not named Frankenstein.
Right.
Most, yeah. Boris
That,
Karloff.
that's a
Oh, go
battle
ahead.
that will be waged till the end of time.
Exactly. I personally have always liked the idea of his name being Adam, but even that's not necessarily, you know, canonical.
Hmm.
But in some stories he's called Adam, in some stories he has no name. But Boris Karloff, another classic actor who was made very famous from the horror genre, did an
And
excellent job.
he was actually 44 years old when this came out, so he achieved success later in life due to Frankenstein. He became a household name after this.
Yeah, and he definitely had a great run at Universal with some other monsters, as we'll
Hmm.
see. One thing I really like about these is the poster art. A lot of this was hand drawn. Some of it has kind of an art and how you say, Art Deco or Nuevo kind of flavor to it.
Hmm.
So a lot more artistry to this than just, you know, the photography that they use for
Right.
movie films or movie posters today.
Right.
If
Everything
you
is
even,
Photoshop today.
yeah.
Mm.
So we've kind of lost some artistry, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course, NECA hits it out of the park again with this one. And there's one of the accessory sets that Gojitron was talking about.
Hmm.
For Frank, they gave him his laboratory table where he's first seen in the film, and you can put a sheet over him and change his head so that he's all bandaged up. And of course, there's Fire Bad
Yeah.
comes with that set.
Yeah, I love the expressions on those heads.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing. Very, very expressive heads to do different scenes if you're doing toy photography or just setting them up in a display.
Hmm.
The flowers, which of course are from a pivotal scene in the film, you know, chains, multiple hands. I find no fault with this. I don't have these because I've been kind of leery of NECA's Q, you know, quality assurance in the past hasn't been the best, but
Right.
they seem to have improved in recent years.
Hmm.
So this is the one I went for. I like the Jada. Again, he's a more generic Frankenstein, but you've got all the feels there. He's got the suit that you normally see him with. He's got the big clunky boots. He's
Hmm.
got some chains,
Yep.
and you know, two expressive faces.
Hmm.
So
He's
the
got
one,
all the earmarks of the Universal Frankenstein. And
yeah.
actually, those neck bolts are trademarked as the Universal Frankenstein. No other version of Frankenstein can have bolts in the neck like that.
Ah, okay. That explains why we seem a little different when we get into the Hammer horror stuff.
Hmm.
Okay. And here's the Migo version or
Hmm.
versions. There have been a few.
Yep.
I didn't list all of them because there's only so much space, but the classic one I believe is still available.
Hmm.
The other one that's branded as more of a Boris Karloff style with more of a greenish suit. I don't think that one is currently available. They also did a shirtless version from when he was in the laboratory being worked on the slab. And I think there was a glow in the dark version as well, as maybe a black and white.
Yeah,
They've
and
done a whole kind, all kinds of
yeah.
different ones.
He also did the Son of Frankenstein version where he has sort of the fur vest on.
Right.
They released one of those as well.
Speaking of that, we'll get to some of the sequels for Frankenstein.
Hmm.
The Bride, um,
Is
another
this
one that
is this the most iconic hairdo in cinema history?
I think so. It's one of those that it's definitely been lampooned a lot in other horror films.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know the white streaks. I guess lightning and reanimation are not good on your hair. But she did a good job. I thought the movie was pretty good. It was a little clunky in parts, but the actress kind of played off the whole idea of the shock of being brought back to life and
Right.
oh yeah, this is going to be your husband. No, thank you.
Yeah. You kind of feel bad for the monster at the end there, where he realizes,
Yeah,
no one's ever going to love him, not even her. And then
yeah,
the famous line, "We belong dead."
exactly. It's it's well worth a watch.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there are figures now. An all bandaged up version that is underneath her gown that she comes with NECA. So she has the bandaged head, as
Hmm.
well as the horrified look of seeing her hubby to be. And well done. I think the likeness on this really captures the actress from the film.
Hmm.
This is another one that has not yet been released, but is supposed to be coming in June of this year. The NECA, or I mean the Jada, excuse me, is already out,
Hmm.
and again, it's a fair likeness. Again, it's more of a generic style. A couple of props from the film, and another head sculpt that for expressions. It's definitely worth picking up if 1/12 is your scale.
Yep.
And for some reason, the Migos they decided to go green with her face. I guess to
Yeah,
make her
that was an
match
odd
Frank.
choice. Yeah.
But it definitely pops,
Hmm.
against the white gown and stuff.
Yeah,
But
we can see one of the most popular his and her Halloween costumes in history right there.
yep, they do make a cute couple.
Hmm.
But yeah, speaking of Son of Frankenstein, like father, like son, Baron Wolf von Frankenstein discovers the remains of the monster, who is again Boris Karloff in this one, and decides to try to save the family name by resurrecting the creature and prove his dad knew what he was doing, which of course is always a great idea. Except in this case, he finds out that somehow the monster only listens to Igor, doesn't
Right.
listen to him, and
Hmm.
hijinks will ensue.
And of course,
And as
Igor
you,
was played by Bela Lugosi in that one.
that's right. Yeah, these guys they show up in a lot of different roles in the films, and
Yeah.
not always the role that they're most known for.
Right.
And here's the great Son of Frankenstein
Oh, yep.
figure by Migo.
Hmm.
The fur suit is kind of cool. This was kind of lampooned, and I think in the recent Munsters film that Rob Zombie did, he kind of did the a takeoff on this look,
Hmm.
but pretty well done. And then we get to one of my favorites, the Wolf Man.
Yes.
And this was definitely a challenge for Lon Chaney Jr. because he had to play two roles and the
Hmm.
transformation in between. And there was no CGI back then. They literally had to put all that hair on the actor. And
Yep.
from what I understand, it was a very long and uncomfortable process.
Yeah. And it was actually yak hair. They had to import that.
But the effects were pretty chilling.
Yep.
Um, it was just a different take. I mean, most
Mhm.
of the modern werewolf type films, they go for more of the longer snout and more
Mhm.
animalistic look. This one, it was more like they said, the wolf man. He was more
Right.
man than wolf, but he
Mhm.
had some of the characteristics.
Yeah. And this wasn't Universal's first werewolf movie. The first one was The Werewolf of London, I believe,
Hmm.
1935. But then the Wolfman came along and he became the iconic version of the werewolf. And interesting to note, Frankenstein, Dracula, the other monsters were played by different actors through the series. Lon Chaney Jr. is the only actor to portray Lawrence Talbot, the Wolfman, in I believe it was 5 films. So he was
Yep.
the only one of those actors to carry through with his character through the whole series.
Yeah, and it's interesting how in some of the sequels, what where he's playing his iconic role, he's playing against other movie monsters that, the actors are there, but they're not in the same role that you would think they would be,
Right.
which is kind of interesting.
Hmm.
So one of my favorite sequels is Wolfman meets or Frankenstein meets the Wolfman.
Hmm.
Wasn't the best story, but it's fun to see the two monsters together and the whole storyline of how they come together and why they come together. And of course, as you mentioned, Lon Chaney Jr. does reprise his role. But in this version, I believe it's Bela Lugosi as the monster, which
Yes.
is kind of unusual.
Hmm.
But he did a pretty good job.
Hmm.
I don't
Yep.
know if Karloff didn't want to do it or he wasn't available at the time, but Lugosi said sure.
Yep. And this was the beginning of all the Monster Mash crossovers. This was the first
Oh,
one.
yeah. So according to Universal, they started calling them the Monster Rallies because you're
Hmm.
getting everybody together.
Yep.
And these also were the last three in that original classic series where Lon Chaney Jr. reprised the Wolfman role.
Hmm.
As you mentioned, House of Frankenstein, then shortly after, House of Dracula, and then the horror comedy Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, which I include because it does actually have the original horror characters. You've got
Hmm.
Bela Lugosi and you
Yep.
have Lon Chaney Jr. in the film.
Mm. And interesting to note, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is the only other time that Lugosi played Dracula outside of the 1931 film. So he only played the character twice, but he left such an indelible, image on pop culture. He's known for that character.
Right. John Carradine, I believe, played in
Yes.
House of Frankenstein
Hmm.
and House of Dracula. And he had a more sinister take on the character, but he wasn't trying to just emulate Lugosi. He put his own spin on it, which
Right.
was not bad.
Hmm.
And again, NECA does a great figure here. Lots of accessories, good face sculpt, all the details you want. One interesting thing with their version is it does come with the Lawrence Talbot
Right.
head and hands, so you can have him transforming,
Hmm.
which is kind of neat.
Yeah.
A lot of other Wolfman figures don't offer that. I have the NECA version or the Jada version. I keep messing that up. Jada. Again, the articulation on these is really good. This is one of their more recent ones they put out. I like it. It's
Hmm.
fun, and he
Yep.
hangs out with my Scooby Gang sometimes.
Yep.
And of course, this Migo one is just fun. The colors
Yeah.
are cool. The face sculpt is neat,
Hmm.
and they really did a great job on the hands and feet to give
Yep.
him that menacing look.
He's got these clawed hands. The face sculpt doesn't look anything like Lon Chaney Jr., but it is a fun figure with the claw hands and the wolf feet.
Yep. Yeah, they did a good job. And now with the Migo, do they just have? Is it just a normal body under the
Yeah.
clothes? And it's
Hmm.
just the hands and feet that are different. Okay,
Right.
I kind of
Yep.
figure. Yeah,
Mhm.
they kind of use a generic butt
Yeah, Migo
underneath.
has the standard bodies, and they change the hands, feet, and heads.
Okay,
Hmm.
but again, it's a fun one. I
Yep.
like it. And there have been some variants, even a
Hmm.
flocked version I found, which was kind of disturbing. I'm not a big
Yeah.
flock fan, but Karloff returns,
Hmm.
this time as another classic monster, the Mummy. And this one was really well received. It was a good film, popular in its day, and he again plays kind of a dual role where he's, the like a high priest,
Right.
and then you see him as the Mummy also. So
Yeah,
it's pretty interesting.
he's only actually in the mummy makeup for a couple of minutes on screen. He plays 90% of the film as Ardith Bey, which is the transformed mummy into the high priest. So the image of the mummy is iconic, but Karloff didn't have that makeup on for very long.
And I'm betting he was probably glad he didn't because it looks like it's again pretty uncomfortable, just like putting on all that yak hair.
Hmm.
But again, iconic.
Yep.
And another set of sequels come.
Hmm.
Mummy's Hand in 1940. Not as great.
Hmm.
This one was kind of almost a shake and bake, where they took the score from the Son of Frankenstein movie and they took some scenes from another movie and just reused stuff and
Yep.
threw it together. Not great.
Yeah, and not many people realize it's not the same mummy. Imhotep was the mummy in the first film. In all the sequels, it's a different mummy named Karis. So,
Okay,
really hardcore fans kind of differentiate between Imhotep and Karis when it comes to merchandising.
makes sense.
Hmm.
And then we see the Mummy's Tomb, and with this one, Lon Chaney shows
Yep.
up.
Lon Chaney hit the grand slam. He played Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and the Mummy. So he hit the Universal Monsters grand slam.
And did a pretty good job. Again, this, as you mentioned, this mummy is called Karis.
Yes.
I think that's how it's pronounced.
Hmm.
So a lot of different mummies came to terrorize the poor Egyptologists that would dig them up. So a lot of different sequels. The, the other ones, they just get kind of silly after a while.
Yeah.
But again, there's a great Boris Karloff rendition of the mummy from NECA. This one also has an accessory pack of the sarcophagus and a chest, which I believe is supposed to hold the sacred jars that has something to do with his reanimation in some form.
Hmm.
And then, of course, the scroll comes with him that you're not supposed to read.
Yeah.
But nobody follows the instructions.
Nope.
It's like, I'm sure it's written on there somewhere in hieroglyphics. Do not read aloud.
Don't read this, you'll
But
be cursed. Okay, I'll read it.
and Migo's version,
Hmm.
again, pretty cool. Cloth bandages
Yep.
with a pretty good likeness in the head.
Hmm.
Um, and that's about it. Jada hasn't put one out yet, but I'm guessing it's coming. But now we're on to one of your favorites,
Yes,
and
sir.
he's kind of becoming one of mine too. The more I look into it,
Hmm.
um, this was actually something I didn't know. The 3D craze was starting to pick up, and Universal got on the bandwagon and made this a 3D monster film.
Hmm.
So I'm sure with the underwater scenes and stuff, that made it a little bit more terrifying.
Yes. Yep. And it's a beautifully shot film. The underwater scenes are great, especially getting to look at Julia Adams playing the character of Kay in that iconic white one piece bathing suit.
Right? Yeah,
Just
she
beautiful
definitely.
scenes of her swimming with the creature kind of swimming below her and kind of reaching for her. That's, classic horror 101.
Oh
The
yeah,
things you can't
very
see under the water.
exactly. That's kind of what Jaws borrows from, is that
Hmm.
concept of what's lurking beneath.
Right.
But yeah, she was a knockout, and
Hmm.
I could see why the Gill man was goo goo for her. But it's not over yet. Even though he was riddled with bullets in the first one, and you thought he was dead, nope, he's
Hmm.
just resting. And strangely enough, they take him to like a aquatic
Right. They take him to like
park.
the 1950s version of SeaWorld and put
Yeah,
him on display. What could go wrong?
yeah, exactly. So again, he finds a cutie that he decides he wants to make his own, and
Hmm.
this breaks out of containment, and all kinds of bad things go on.
Hmm.
So another 3D film, and it was. What do we have here? It was the only 3D film released in 1955, and the only 3D sequel to a 3D film released during the golden age of 3D. So this was kind of a big thing at that time. New tech.
Hmm.
One more time, the creature walks among us.
I didn't like this one.
A lot of people did not.
No.
Was not a favorite, but
Hmm.
at least you got to see the creature come back.
Yep.
And I did find a really cool picture of Rishu Browning, the
Rico
gentleman
Browning.
who
Yep.
he did not play the on land creature in some of the
Right.
scenes, but he did all the underwater stunts, which
Correct.
were
Hmm.
tough enough to do just as a swimmer, but to do it in that getup,
Hmm.
that had to be interesting.
Yeah.
So Jada has this one,
Hmm.
and I like it. Again, good figure, well articulated, good expressions on the face. Comes with some props from the film. Uh, the variant on this is glow in the dark, which is kind of neat. and this I think was an Entertainment Earth exclusive, but
Yes.
it's still available in a few spots.
Hmm.
And then Mego really did a great job on this one. The
Hmm.
suit on this has all the detail. The face sculpt is really pretty.
Yep.
You know, and they're recreating that classic scene where he's going after those feet.
Hmm. And so I have my creature family.
Oh yeah,
So there's Migo, Jada, and the reaction.
nice. The reaction's
Creature is
not
my number
bad.
one. Yeah, he's good. And also the I have a carded reaction as well. You can see the card art, just
That is
beautiful.
really nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
usually
again,
get I usually get every version of the creature that gets released. So I'll probably get the NECA one when it comes out.
fair enough. Speaking of, I think I have an image. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I don't have a release date on this, but it's apparently sometime this fall.
Hmm.
And again, great articulation. At least from what we see from the photographs, great sculpt. It should be a good one.
Hmm.
And they're doing this in a color and a black and white. So they're kind of doing a line of black and white figures to emulate the look of the classic monster cinema, which
Hmm.
I don't really go for that. It's like I want them in color because
Yeah.
I live in color, you know.
The other thing about this is I can't really tell the difference between all those different sets of hands. Does he really need four sets of hands? The creature can't get his hands in that many positions to have four sets of hands.
That's true. I don't know what the difference is with them. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like you ever seen him really grip much other than
Right.
his victims.
He just kind of swipes people.
Yeah, the facial expressions, those are pretty interesting,
Hmm.
and they do make a pretty good difference there.
Hmm.
So then we go on. Whoops, pardon me. We go on to another classic, not as classic or celebrated, but certainly a very interesting one
Hmm.
from a classic novel
Yep.
from H.G. Wells.
Was very well
And
reviewed on its release at the time.
yeah, a very well received and very popular. And of
Hmm.
course, it spawned its own set of sequels,
Hmm.
um, which I would say were very loosely based on the
Yes,
original,
very.
if at all. Yeah. So I just kind of threw them all here together because they're kind of interchangeable. They were just your classic Saturday popcorn fare.
Hmm.
The Invisible Man Returns was just kind of a rehashing of the same idea. Somebody gets the formula, it makes them go cuckoo, and then problems. The Invisible Woman was actually more of a comedy, but it does fall in that same line. Invisible Agent was actually a pretty interesting idea, but a pretty boring film. He becomes an agent for the Allies, and obviously being invisible is pretty good for a spy.
Hmm.
And
Interesting
so,
to note that the Invisible Man Returns featured Vincent Price as the Invisible Man, one of the very few times that the horror icon appeared in an actual Universal film.
right. And Visible Man's Revenge, again, more of the same.
Hmm.
Kind of forgettable, but if you want to catch all the invisible stuff, this is what you got to look for.
Hmm.
And then NECA's figure. This one, I believe, has just recently been released, and a lot of details and bits and pieces here. Pretty well done. I like the suit.
Hmm.
Um, the Jada one went with the dressing gown choice, which it is in the film. It is an iconic look. I kind of wish they'd gone with the business suit instead, but that's just my preference.
Hmm.
A lot of good accessories, including some gags where you can have him undoing the bandages and there's nothing underneath, or pulling off a glove and there's nothing there. So kind of neat. And of
Hmm.
course, the beaker with the invisible solution.
Yep.
It's a nice little ad. And this one I thought was really cool. For Migo's re- version, they actually did a clear figure.
Hmm.
So even under the suit, the soft goods, it is a transparent figure all the way through.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah, and I do like
So
the. I have the boxed version they released a limited number of horror characters in those boxes that emulate how Migos were sold in the mid 1970s. That's how I remember buying Migos back then in the long boxes with the windows. So
Right.
I was glad
Me
they
too.
released a few characters in that style.
Ironically, sometimes referred to as coffin boxes, which makes sense for horror figures.
Hmm.
But yeah, the Mego superheroes I got all came in the boxes like that I remember.
Hmm.
So those are the biggies that we have from Universal. I will bring up a couple of honorable mentions or dishonorable because they're villains, they're baddies. Um, Jekyll and Hyde, as I mentioned, is not a Universal monster.
Hmm.
It was done by Paramount, again, based on a classic novel. This was 31, and it was really well done and nominated for 3 Academy Awards.
Hmm. One of the most adapted stories probably ever. There are so many different versions. Even Looney Tunes did 4 different shorts parodying Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And
That's
of
true.
course, we know he was one of the inspirations for the Incredible Hulk as well.
Right. And this look for the Doctor and his alter ego
Hmm.
is the one that most people recognize, and so it's
Right.
easy for people to mistake it for one of the Universal monsters.
Hmm.
And Migo did a great job on this one. Got his beaver hat and his cloak and the really menacing hide look. I don't know if they did it. I couldn't find any reference to a Dr. Jekyll figure. I think they only did Mr. Hyde.
Right, Mr. Hyde. Yep, that's it.
So another uh, honorable mention,
Hmm.
The Fly. More of a sci-fi horror than classic horror, but it's definitely one that most people
Yep.
remember and recognize.
Hmm.
And as we mentioned about Mr. Price, this was the film that really got him going into a horror um, stardom, if you
Right.
will.
Hmm.
He'd been in other films before, but
Hmm.
usually playing secondary or just background roles. In this one, he was more of an investigator. He wasn't the main monster guy, but this is the one that connected him with the horror genre, and it just kind of stuck.
Yep. Yeah, this is a great film. One of the all-time classics. I prefer this over the. I know a lot of people like the Jeff Goldblum, Cronenberg
Right.
Fly, but like I said, I'm not into the body horror or the gross out stuff. So I prefer the classics. So this is my Fly.
Yeah, this one was more about the tragic story of science gone wrong instead of
Right.
body horror. I mean, it was horrible, but
Hmm.
and of course, it had its own sequels.
Hmm.
Uh, your mileage may vary on how great, but basically, someone inherits the teleportation idea, and there's always a fly around. It's
Yeah.
like I don't
Always
know
a
why.
pesky fly. I think with all
Yep,
these different franchises, the law of diminishing returns is in effect when it comes to the sequels.
absolutely.
Just like modern franchises like Aliens, Predator, and Terminator. You know, once the initial concept is done, it's kind of where do we go from there? It's never as good as the original.
Right. One thing that was kind of interesting with The Fly is the original. They really made a big deal about filming it in Cinescope, so
Yeah.
it's full color, it's
Mhm.
bright, it's big screen. And then for the sequels are like, just film it in black and white. We don't care. Just put it out there.
Right.
So black and white was cheaper, and people went to go see them.
Hmm.
And of course, Migo gave us a pretty cool
Yep.
figure and a couple of variants. I mean,
Hmm.
here you've got a couple different tie colors, and there is a flocked version of this if you are
Yes.
into flocked. I didn't put it up there because I thought it was icky. I like this version better. I don't like the way the flock stuff feels.
You
Even
don't like
the
fuzzy flies.
I do not, or panthers or anything else. So yeah, that I believe is the end of our monsters. However, there is one other honorable mention I'd like to bring up, and this is one that most people probably have seen. While it isn't truly a classic horror, it is an homage to those and a parody as well.
Hmm.
Great film, good humor, and it's not so much you know poking fun in a mystery science theater way. It's a whole different kind of comedy. Mel Brooks is Mel Brooks. He's a
Right.
great writer. He co-wrote with Gene Wilder, who also plays the young doctor, and Peter Boyle. For not speaking, he did a great job. I mean,
Hmm.
other than singing "Putting on the Ritz," I don't think
Yep.
he had much to work with. But just a
Yep.
great film.
And filming it in
And
black and white as an homage to the original films, a bold choice, but it worked.
it did. I think they even used some props from some of the old films as well, at least in the laboratory.
Hmm.
And of course, Migo says, I think that deserves a figure or three. So they did put out like an anniversary special with the doctor and his creature in their soft shoe routine.
Hmm.
And of course, Igor.
Igor.
And yep, such a great character.
Hmm.
So those are out there and pretty darn cool.
Hmm.
So uh, now we get to our top two. I asked you, what are your top two monsters and what are your top two toys in this category?
Hmm.
And you'd mentioned Frankenstein and the
Yep.
creature, which totally understand.
Hmm.
And some creature features. Uh, Again, Kay Lawrence, the character,
Yep.
I could definitely see why this is one of your favorite toys.
Hmm.
Diamond Select did great accessories with their figures. The figures
Yeah.
weren't the most articulated, but I love the accessories.
Yeah. The K Lawrence figure is just a static figure, but no articulation. But it looks great on display. I have it on my shelf over there, and it recreates one of the most famous stills from that film, where the creature's kind of lurking up on K, reclining
Yep,
on the ground. So, yeah, it's cool. And then, of course,
definitely.
the Remco mini monster creature, my first creature toy. Those were released back in 1980. Remco did a whole line of Universal monsters, so that was my first creature figure.
And glow in the dark to boot. Very
Hmm.
cool.
Yep.
Love the glow in the dark feature. Doesn't always work so great, but it's still kind of neat.
Yep.
And for me, I got a 2-for-1 because Frankenstein and the Wolfman are my two top favorites, and I got them both in one film. So I'm loving that.
Hmm.
And of course, there have been some other monster mashes where they show up together, but this one, I really like this film. It's
Hmm.
just a feel good for me.
Yep.
And the Jada figures, I really like them.
Hmm.
They fit with most of the stuff I collect. And who doesn't want a Wolfman or Frank to hang out with your Action Force or Marvel Legends or whoever?
Yep. Exactly.
So these are fun for me.
Hmm.
And that whoops, wrong button. That's pretty much it for the presentation stuff.
Hmm.
But what a neat trip to do some research on this and check out some of the films again. Seeing them as a kid and then watching them again as an adult, you have a definite appreciation for the artistry
Hmm.
in some of it, whether it's the makeup effects or the cinematography, especially in the black and white, because
Yeah.
they had to. I mean, in some ways, the black and white enhances the horror because your
Hmm.
use of shadow and black. Just I think it makes it look scarier,
Yeah.
even if by today's standards, the horror isn't as horrible. It's
Hmm.
still pretty cool.
Yep. Yeah. Definitely. Black
Um,
and white is a lost art. I don't think the films would look the same in color. I don't think they'd have the same effect, the same tone. So yeah, definitely enjoy those classics.
yeah, and they're infinitely rewatchable.
Hmm.
Most of them.
Most of them.
Some of the sequels, not so much, but the originals, yes.
Hmm.
Any other thoughts on these, Goji, or is there anything I missed?
No, I think we covered just about everything.
Cool.
Yeah,
There
it's
was, yeah, there was plenty more material to dig into, but we're we're trying to keep this show at around an hour, and we're
yep.
really pushing it.
Hmm.
But hopefully, for you at home, this has been, if not entertaining, at least educational. There's a lot of cool figures out there that are on the market right now. If this hits you where you live, put together a monster mash, have some
Hmm.
fun, and definitely check out these films. A lot of them are still available. You can pick them up on DVD or Blu-ray or on
Hmm.
your favorite streaming service.
Yeah.
or on a occasional Saturday random movie of the week.
hmm Yeah, a lot of them available on streaming for free. So
Yeah.
yeah, definitely search them out.
So, Carl, I would like to invite you back again to dip into the monsters. Maybe we could look at some of the Hammer horror at some point.
Definitely, yes. I'm always up
Cool.
for monster talk.
Excellent. Well, we'll set a date in the near future. But thanks for your time today going through this with me. It was a lot of
Thank
fun.
you. Yeah, glad to be
And
here.
glad to have you. And everyone who's been watching, thank you. And hopefully you check under your bed and in your closet and make sure none of these critters follow you home. But if they do, just, hang out with them. They're just monsters are people too. They just need some love.
They're just misunderstood.
Yeah.
All Frankenstein wants is a friend and a good cigar.
Yes. A good cigar, maybe some brandy. Who knows?
Yes.
All right, everybody. Have a great one, and we'll see you soon.
See you
Thanks.
guys.